This is the tier list for all 22 specs in Cataclysm. Every single one of them is gonna be ranked from meme to OP. Two caveats here. This is around 25 man raiding, because in 10 man raiding utility and debuffs are way more important than everything else. If you really want to see a 10 man tier list, just take whatever that has a battle res on it and you put it at the top list, and there you go, that's a 10 man raiding. That's how it works. And that's a great segue into the second caveat, and that is that this is my personal balanced opinion between utility and DPS. You see, DPS doesn't always tell the whole story in raiding, and that is something that I can illustrate with the Destruction Warlock dilemma. Okay, the Destruction Warlock, most of the expansion is a pretty crappy spec DPS wise. It's not the worst, right? It's not the worst, but I would say it's like a this tier, playable tier. The thing about the Destruction Warlock is that you got all the courses and you got a battle res, and that makes it a pretty decent spec. So we're gonna put it right here. Now we got the Unholy Dead Knight. The DPS is very good, okay, and you also get a battle res that is excellent utility. As I said, Cataclysm is all about battle reses. They are not as vital in 25 as they are in 10 men, but they are still very, very important, because you're always gonna have people dying in Cataclysm. That's just the way it goes. So we're gonna put the Unholy Dead Knight at good. Frost is the same utility, but with terrible DPS, and only because it has a battle res, I'm gonna put it on playable. It's barely playable. Just play Unholy. I know it's harder, just do it. Now we got the Beastmaster Hunter. There is not a lot I can put on it. It has like good AoE, but it is pretty mediocre on everything. Like, you're not gonna get kicked out if you drop this into the raid, but it's just decent. Now if you take the mediocrity of the Beastmaster and you remove the good AoE, which is the only thing it has, you get the Marksmanship Hunter. That's right, that's gonna be our first meme right now. And Marksmanship is pretty crap for PvE in Cataclysm, so yeah. It goes on the toilet, it's not gonna be played now. Okay, we're gonna go to the Feral Druid, okay? The Feral Druid has really good DPS actually. It is like on par with the Boomkin. The main problem with the Feral Druid is that your battle res is not nearly as reliable as the Boomkin battle res. You know, the Boomkin DPS doesn't even have to swap out of form. He just battle res somebody and keep going, and that will matter in some fights and like a lot of situations. You're gonna lose DPS when you battle res. Also, the Feral DPS is not very good at burst damage. It's more for survival, for sustained damage, and that is also a problem. And because in the later tiers, as you're gonna see, I'm gonna talk about it in a minute, burst damage is everything. It is a decent spec, okay? Nobody's gonna complain that they got a Feral DPS in their class, but it is not the best. Okay, now this icon, I believe, they should have just wrote the spec on the icon. This icon, I believe, is the Survival Hunter. Okay, the Survival Hunter not only is the best DPS of all the hunters, at the same time you get the haste buff from traps. So yeah, the Survival Hunter, you know, best utility and best DPS at the same time. We're gonna put it on OP. Basically every time you want to bring a Survival Hunter to your raid. Okay, now we got the Arcane Mage. The Arcane Mage, funnily enough, is the opposite of the TBC Arcane Mage. It starts out pretty good and then it becomes crappier because it doesn't have any scaling later on. Even still, I would say it is a playable spec, not something you would wanna take. So like in tier 11, I would say like they are like top middle contenders, but after that they fall off pretty fast. And they get simply outclassed by the superior in almost any way. Fire Mage, they got better burst, they got better sustain damage, they have insane scaling, and for that reason Fire Mage is gonna go at the top. Now we got the Boomkin, very similar damage to the Feral DPS with extra, I would say it has better burst damage, and on top of that the Boomkin has some decent cleave damage. I don't know how to call it if cleave damage. So like Boomkins have like decent damage when they are targeting 3 or 4 mobs, like not an entire big AoE, but more like that kind of situation. And that matters in some fights later on too. And for that reason, we're gonna leave it at good. Now we got the Frost Mage. Okay, just take the bad damage later on from the Arcane Mage, and then you take the bad damage early on from the Frost Mage. It's trash, okay? The Frost Mage is a PvP spec, I am sorry. I know I like Frost myself, but it is not viable in Cataclysm, sadly. It is for crowd control. If you wanna do like a crowd control build or something like that and play with it, I guess you can, but it's just bad. If I am not mistaken, this is the Retribution paladin icon, and the Retribution paladin, you know, one of the best DPSers, especially later on. The scaling is great. At the same time, you get blessings, you get auras, the whole 9 yards, one of the best utility classes in the game, and for that reason is going on OP. I had to check again. This is the icon of the Shadow Priest, okay? The Shadow Priest has excellent utility, especially if you get a lot of casters in the raid. They buff and just like the Boomkin. I forgot to say that about the Boomkin, you know, 3% crit. You do more damage with a Shadow Priest in your group if you are a caster, and that is great because there is a lot of really good casters in Cataclysm. At the same time, they have some of the best clip damage, okay? So this is the point where it matters. I would say in Cataclysm, caster DPS has 3 categories: single target, AoE, you know, big damage in a circle, and clip damage, which is what I would say tagging like 3 or 4 mobs at a time, not a huge group, like I said before. The Shadow Priest is almost uncontested in that situation. If you are fighting from 3 to 4 mobs, Mind Seed is some of the best damage you could possibly do. Of course, your single target is also very solid, so we're gonna put the Shadow Priest at good. Now the Elemental Shaman. The Elemental Shaman in Cataclysm, actually in Rato the Lich King, but you know what I'm saying, it lost a lot of its value as utility, you know. They are not as OP as Shamans used to be in TBC, you know. Not only that, in Cataclysm, Mages also get Bloodlust, so Shamans are not even that important anymore. And that doesn't matter that the Elemental Shaman is bad, actually quite the contrary. It has excellent damage early on, but at the same time, the damage doesn't fall off too much, okay? So, yes, in a true scaling number sense, your damage as a Shaman falls off in later tiers, but here's the thing. Shamans have excellent burst damage, some of the best in the game. And this is not gonna show up in the middles necessarily, but in like the later tiers, especially Deathwing, you know, like Dragon Soul, burst damage is extremely important for the mechanics. And since the Shamans excel at it, it happens to be that they are excellent early on because they got excellent damage, and they are excellent later on because they also have burst damage, which you need, even though their total damage is not gonna be as good. I would say they peak at Firelands, which is still, you know, like very respectable. Throughout the whole expansion, Elemental Shamans are the best. They are going on OP. Now we got the Enhancement Shaman. I think in Cataclysm still, Blizzard haven't figured out exactly what they wanted the Enhancement Shaman to be. As you're gonna see in almost every expansion, they completely changed the Enhancement Shaman. Blizzard can never decide what this class is gonna be. The Enhancement Shaman is all about sustained damage. In the contrary of the Elemental Shaman, they are all about sustained damage. Their scaling is decent, I would say it's not the worst. They do need gear to start up, so in the first tier they are not gonna be that good. Like I was saying with the other classes, okay, the one thing that the Enhancement Shaman really excels at is cleaving damage, which is something you're gonna be dealing more, you're gonna be wanting more in tier 12. I would say this is good, okay? It's not nearly as good as the Elemental, but it is a pretty respectable class. And speaking of clip, now we got the Affliction Warlock, okay? So there is basically all 3 specs of the Warlock are viable. I'm gonna spoil the video a little bit here, but I would say that Demonology is superior both in single target DPS and in AoE DPS than Affliction. Also, Affliction is, in my opinion, you know, personal opinion, a lot harder to play, and in my opinion it is not worth mastering Affliction. Like, you know, the amount of value that you get from being really good at Affliction when you can just go to Demonology and boom, 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 and do more damage. The damage is good. The damage is good. It is just not worth it. I'm gonna put it on good because I cannot put it on the same tier as Destruction. It is better. Okay, Affliction, again, like the other ones, because you work with dots, right? The thing about dotting is that you can dot multiple mobs at the same time and do a gazillion ton of damage. And even though your AoE is god-awful in Affliction, actually not god, it's bad, it's not good. What you really bring to the table is, I think, as far as hitting 2 mobs at the same time, Affliction is the best damage in the game. You can tag like 3 or 4 mobs, maybe 4 is a little pushing it. You can dot 3 mobs at the same time really well and like maintain it pretty well. It's really hard to beat the Affliction damage on that. But that's the only thing they bring to the table that Demonology doesn't bring, okay? And Demonology, as I'm saying right now, OP. This is gonna be one of the strongest DPS meter classes in all the expansion. Demonology is gonna top the meters almost in every fight. Actually not quite top the meters, but they're gonna be like top 3 easily in almost all the expansion. Demonology is great and it is also easier, so why wouldn't you play Demonology? Okay, now we got the Fury Warrior, and the Fury Warrior is what I would call the little brother syndrome. You're gonna see a lot of this in the tier list like you saw with Affliction. Fury is acceptable, Fury is decent, okay? If it stood alone as a spec, it wouldn't be that bad. The problem is that Arms is simply better in pretty much every way. Their scaling is great, so eventually they catch up with Arms, but they never surpass Arms, and that's an issue. And for that reason, we're gonna put Fury on decent, and that brings us to Arms Warriors, okay? As I said with Demonology that they easily make top 3, okay, Arms Warrior is easily top 1 in almost every part of the expansion. Arms Warrior is really solid. They bring some buffs for the other melees too. Arms Warrior is just is a whole another league of its own. As a matter of fact, we're gonna put the Arms Warrior here first, just to illustrate that fact, okay? Arms Warrior, one of the best specs in the game, if not outright the best spec in the game for DPS. So that's its rightful place right there, brother. Now we got the Subtlety Rogue, and let me be frank with you for a minute. Rogue is pretty much a class that I never play, so take these 3 specs with a grain of salt here. I would say that Subtlety is pretty decent damage all throughout the expansion, but it is just not as good as Assassination. I am told that Subtlety is a lot harder to play, and you know, I gotta count that, you know, your execution matters. So we're gonna put it at decent, and we're gonna put Assassination at good, because it is simply superior. Rogues get access to legendaries, and that makes them pretty good. So you gotta keep that in mind, but that's way later. And again, if I am not mistaken, this is the Combat Rogue. I'm gonna put it on meme. It's simply bad. It is simply bad. Everybody I ask on this, I had to ask people on the Rogue because I didn't quite know how the Rogue works. Everybody tells me Combat is a meme. It doesn't work. So yep, there you go. So now people, let me remind you, pretty much every class in the expansion has a very good spec for DPS right here, which I think is excellent. You know, Cataclysm is more, the spec is not nearly as important as in other expansions. They streamlined a lot of how utility works and whatnot. And even if you see like some specs that really go ahead of the rest, like Arms Warrior, don't be disheartened if you like playing Fury. It is still, if you're really good at the game and you do your stuff and you do your due diligence and you grind it, you are gonna pull your weight, you are gonna be decent at the game. There are, as you're seeing in the list, I think only 3 specs that I would never ever want to have in a raid. The other ones I can kind of accept. And as far as PvE damage goes, Cataclysm is one of the most balanced expansions ever. I know. I am sure you're gonna disagree with my rankings. You know, I have my very strong opinions on balance. You know, people get mad when I make this. I am more than happy to see how you disagree with it in the comments. Try to be polite. Try and subscribe to the channel, join the Discord, or may the Lord get you. And thank you for watching.